Peggy, I'm not sure that you had a chance to see the movie yet. Did you watch the movie tonight? Have you already seen the movie Never Again?
I watched almost all of it. I have 15 minutes left because I got a
Okay.
little bit of a late start. Amazing. It's so well done, so sensitive, and what a unique perspective to take those two voices of Irving Roth and Kasim Hafiz and bring them together in the narrative. Beautifully done.
Oh my. Uh, I'm sure you've heard countless stories from your parents and other family members may have shared their experiences and the atrocities of the Holocaust and the things that took, horrible things that took place in the Jewish life there. Uh, how does that make you feel, even as a child, far removed from the actual event, but as a child of survivors? How does it make you feel?
Well, I'm not so far removed from the event. I was born, and I'll give away my age here, but you have to promise not to tell anybody. Um, I was born in Landsberg, Germany, in a displaced persons camp. My parents were teenage Holocaust survivors. They met after the war, fell in love, got married, and I was born in Landsberg. And if you know your history, Landsberg is where Hitler was imprisoned and where he wrote Mein Kampf, his plan for the genocide of the Jews and the prevention of all Jewish births, including mine. So I think that from the moment I was born in the place that I was born, it somewhat determined at least a piece of my destiny that I would be connected for the Jewish history and the Jewish future. And there's an inextricable link. So it's not just the stories that I heard.
You actually lived this out.
I lived out after the war. I was
Yes.
one of the, I was born in the camp. In fact, in the displaced persons camps, where you would imagine that people would be at the height of despair and give up on humanity, they had the highest birth rate in recorded human history. They
Wow.
chose life. That
Yes.
I can't even understand. But I was raised among all people who are Holocaust survivors. People who sat around our dining room table had the numbers on their arms.
Oh my.
There were there were times that my parents would tell me a little bit. My mother more than my father, but my father told his story more in the silences when I saw him look away and he was lost in a different place, a different time, and then he would see me and come back to here. I knew there was a story there, a story that had no words, a story
Yes.
that words were inadequate.
Wow. Well, Peggy, your story kind of it was said tonight because when after the war, and as many of the Jews, as you mentioned, being displaced, going back to homelands and not being welcomed back, and many of them living in the camps that they spent all those times in, and so I just can't imagine. And Carly, this is what fuels what you do with Stand With Us.
It does in so many ways. It's a remarkable film, first of all, and as a non-Jew, I don't have the same connection to it that Peggy has. But watching the film, you mentioned that perhaps there are emotional reactions and visceral reactions, and there certainly are for me. And so on a personal and a professional level, yes, this is very much what fuels what we do at the Center for Combating Anti-Semitism. And so much of what the film talked about in terms of just what anti-Semitism is, while it can be a complex issue because of its many manifestations, just the fact that it's really pretty simple. It's hatred of Jews because of some part of their identity, and I think Kasim said it best and most simply, but also best when he just said it sounds somewhat trite, but what we do is largely because it's the right thing to do. The same way that we as a society, stand against racism and sexism and all the other forms of discrimination based on some form of identity. This is no different in the sense that it is a form of discrimination, and it needs the voices that are being brought to it. It's crucial.
I had the honor and the privilege several years ago to meet Nina Katz, who lived here in Memphis and was a Holocaust survivor. I met her through John Lindbergh, and he was working on a biography for her. And just the sweet spirit of this dear lady, the love, and how she told the experiences that she had that were just unbelievable that any human being could actually live through those kind of experiences. But to come out and there be a sense of love, you know, not hatred. And she remembers when the her camp was liberated, and the soldiers came in and they lined up. She said around the fence the guards, and some of them were so just horrible, you know, to her Jewish people, and they offered for them to retaliate, but not one Jew retaliated that day. No one picked up a gun. No one, swung a fist. And I just can't imagine that. There's an article I'd like to kind of refer to here. This was published back in 2016, the Journal of Defense Management. And this article says, Holocaust education is a responsibility of all academic institutions. We are obligated to teach students about the reality of crimes perpetrated during World War II, to commemorate the victims, and to sustain a meaningful dialogue between history and memory. The Holocaust was not the first or the last genocide in the history of humanity, but it was unprecedented in many ways and still the most radical attempt to destroy every member of a group without exception. Holocaust education must provide political and military leaders with an understanding not only of the human rights violations that happened under the Nazis, but also with modern examples of prejudice, discrimination, and persecution that motivate genocide. And this is the best accomplished through active learning methods that include discussions with survivors and with peers who have visited historic Holocaust sites. What do you say to that, Carly?
I couldn't agree more in terms of just the crucial nature of Holocaust education. And I have to commend, getting anything through the political system right now seems to be extremely difficult. And I have to commend our Congress for recognizing that recently. And so now there are states, more states that will be implementing Holocaust education. And I think, one of the things that was part of the quote that you read that I think is all the more crucial, and there are situations popping up, across the country involving Holocaust education. And one of them is what was said in there is that it has to teach about the realities, right? The fact that this actually did happen, and it's for that reason that we do it, to one, like you said, to commemorate, but two, because, what do we, I think it was Edmund Burke, who said that, those who are unfamiliar and uneducated about history are doomed to repeat it. And that's obviously, a large part of the point of the film and the title and the phrase "never again." If we don't know and we don't continue to teach generations to come about the atrocities of the Holocaust, then how much more likely is it, and especially based on what we're seeing in society right now with the continued rise in anti-Semitism, how much more likely is it that something along these lines could recur? And God forbid, but it's again, so I couldn't agree more that it is just absolutely crucial that we continue the education about the Holocaust, and people like Peggy and others who have that firsthand experience, and have parents who had the firsthand experience, just how important it is, and Irving, all of those folks, just it's remarkable, and I have to say too, I know you didn't ask about this, but you made the statement about the idea that none of the Jews who were given the opportunity to retaliate, that none of them did that. And I'm with you. I think that it is remarkable. And I think it's worth repeating what Irving says in the film, which is, that a large part of why that was the case is that realization of, I cannot be like this. I cannot be like them. If I have a problem with what they're doing, then I can't turn around and do the very thing that I'm saying I have a problem with, that I'm saying is wrong. And, so just there's so much integrity in that. And I just think that that's remarkable.
Oh, that's a great word there, Carly. Well, how can governments better develop effective policies to combat anti-Semitism within our borders, not only here, but around the world?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start with something that Peggy, I'm going to let Peggy jump in on too, because she's not only a child of survivors, but she works very closely with me and with others on the issue that I'm about to mention, and that is the adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism. It's the international consensus definition. It provides a number of examples of what anti-Semitism can look like, and I think that's the first step for any of these entities, is to adopt that definition and to then implement trainings, make sure that people within those entities are very familiar with what is anti-Semitism, what does it look like, what can it look like. I think that's the first step in how government entities can do this. And then I think the other thing, I mentioned earlier that this isn't about special treatment for Jewish people. This is about equal treatment, yes. Right? The same way that racism is treated, in the same way that sexism is treated, this is the way, or religious discrimination, this is the way that discrimination against Jews should be treated. And so I think those same entities can look to just general non-discrimination laws and look at how to incorporate the IHRA definition into their existing non-discrimination laws. And I know there's a lot of nuance around that. There's a lot of people who have questions about the legalities of it, and we won't get into that tonight, but I think that there's just no question that that's the first step. So I'm going to let Peggy jump in.
So Holocaust education is extremely important because, in fact, most young people today don't know anything about the Holocaust. And when they don't know, they're in danger of being, of course, misled. So when we say, as the movie says, never again, what does that mean? It doesn't mean just saying, here are images of what happened. But more than that, these are warning signs of a society that's being infected with the oldest disease known to mankind, of anti-Semitism. I mean, it can metastasize into different forms, affect different organs of the body politic and the media. But we have to recognize when we see the signs, and that's why the definition is so important. Because when we wait too late, when it's engulfed to society, that it only causes death and despair. So we need to educate the warning signs. When people react based on just emotional venom toward Jews or toward Israel, and they don't want, what Deborah Lipstadt said in the film, they don't want to be bothered by facts because it's just such a strong emotional component. We have to get to our young people early, educate them, and so they will maybe be inoculated against some of the misinformation that various groups are trying to instill in our young people.
Yes, that's a great word there, Peggy. Are you seeing encouraging signs of any particular policies that are being implemented right now that are worth mentioning?
Actually, yes, and I'm glad you asked that, because it's actually been an encouraging past week or so, in that the first province in Canada to adopt the IHRA definition, that occurred within the last week. That was Ontario, so that was a really important move. And then today, the big news that I have to say, Peggy, there were emails flying around about this, and Peggy's reaction was so funny to me. She said, you should have told me to sit down first. And that is that the Global Imams Council has actually adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. And so these are big things that are happening along the lines that we're talking about in terms of policy. And again, I think this is the first step. And when you've got a variety of institutions, we're not just talking about governments, but we're talking about NGOs and administrations at schools. Florida State University being another one that within the last few months has adopted this definition.
Facebook.
But what's that?
Yeah. Facebook.
Right. And then I was going to say, and then social media companies that are utilizing it. Facebook hasn't quite said, yes, we adopt it, but they have, and they've told us directly that they utilize the IHRA definition. So this is extremely encouraging in that regard. Obviously, it's not a fix in and of itself, but it is that, like I said, the first step is that consistent definition to help people to understand and be able to identify anti-Semitism when they see it.
Well, one of the rabbis tonight in the movie Never Again said that the media was a powerful tool to communicate the need for respect and tolerance for one another, as well as he referred to politicians, as we're talking about.
Right.
But I think we needed to see how more grassroots efforts can begin by teaching respect and tolerance. Peggy alluded to, of course, social media too. But, the scripture teaches in Deuteronomy 6:7, you shall teach them diligently to your children. And this really begins in the home. And the home is foundational for these basic truths for respect and tolerance for each other.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's something that Peggy and I do on a regular basis, just as a part of the mission of our organization at Stand With Us. We are an educational organization, and firmly believe that the education about these issues needs to start at a very early age. And you're right, it starts in the home. And so we actually more and more have been doing trainings with parents and with grandparents about how they can educate their kids, especially because we know, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more in detail and later as we go forward, but that the breeding ground for so much of this is the campus.
Yes.
Environment. And so, well before students arrive on campus, it's just crucial that they be trained, that they be educated about these issues. And so, yeah, it's a huge part of what we do.
Well, and speaking of that, because the film tonight, Never Again, was very clear that the problem is drastically increasing on college campuses. And it makes me wonder, as a citizen, here in my community, where these colleges exist in different communities, and we have viewers that are watching tonight, how can we voice our concerns as citizens? I mean, we're the taxpayers that are helping fund many of these schools, especially the public education schools across our states. So what can I do as Joe citizen in light of this?
Well, I think one thing we have to have more speakers standing up for the Jewish students, for their right to identify as being Jewish, as being pro-Israel, and not leave the Jewish students all on their own. So if you have issues on campus and Christian students align themselves with Jewish students and other students of good faith, that will make an enormous difference. So I think one thing Jews are only less than 2% of the population. So on a campus, they can feel very isolated, and they can be more intimidated if they don't have alliances. And so this is an important thing for the Christian and Jewish students and others to say, we're going to stand together against hate. And if somebody attacks one of us, that means they're attacking all of us.
Yes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And Byron, I just want to add to, I get questions along these lines a lot. And again, as a Christian, as a non-Jew, I think back about, how might things have been different? Yes, I love Israel and I love the Jewish people, but I wasn't always as active and as vocal in as I am now. And so I think back about my life and what it looked like growing up. And so in answer to, what can just, Joe Q Public do, I think something that would be extremely influential and also helpful in supporting college students, and Jewish students in particular, or Israeli students, would be for members of other communities. And so, for example, the Christian community, to invite these students to, say a Sunday school class or, some other gathering that they're having, and just ask them, to speak a little bit about their whether it's religious Judaism or just their Jewish identity. What does that mean to you? What does that look like? What do your holidays look like? Just some familiarity, because I think so much of what we see, Kasim talked about this again in the film, the apathy of just the communities, and it's not any particular community. It's just, our lives are full and we get busy, and it's not an issue that maybe directly impacts me. And so I just don't say anything. I don't do anything. But I think this is something that kind of bridges that gap and closes in that gulf between me and the other. And I think that's a large part of fighting any form of discrimination, is just understanding, having a better understanding. And the truth is this: it's really hard to hate somebody when you get to know them
Yes.
and actually start to appreciate and understand them.
Yeah.
Again, I think things like that, and that's just a simple example, but I think there are practical things like that of just inviting some of these students to come and share about their own experiences, to raise awareness, but also to help create a kind of a system of support from even outside the Jewish.
Well, I think that was clearly portrayed tonight as Kasim, actually having been educated, wrongly, by family, peers, and those religious leaders where he was in Europe before he traveled to Israel and actually saw for himself. I had the opportunity on 2 occasions in 2018 to take 2 separate trips to Israel with the Bot Radio Network. We took tours there, and I was given an opportunity to travel with those. And when you watch the news and you hear stories is one thing, but when you actually go and experience the people for yourself and you see how they live, and you see how friendly they are and hospitable, and you get to taste the delicious food and how fresh it is, and experience that and realize you're connecting with something as a Christian myself, and how important the Bible is to me, and seeing how it does come to life when I step on the ground where it came from, and so it really can. We try to start understanding each other is really a good first step. And that brings me to the next comment I want to make and ask you to address this. There was a statement in the film that said, we're living in a self-contained echo chamber. So my question is, how do we step outside of that chamber, outside of our comfort zone, and initiate interest in Jewish people who are living in our community?
So can I?
Yes, Peggy. That's your question.
She's the poster for this.
So I learned this a number of years ago when I was in a tizzy because it was the second Intifada, and every day there's news about more and more civilians and children and women who were killed in Israel. And I was feeling desperate. So I went through the phone directory in Chicago and invited every single pastor and priest in the Chicago area for either a breakfast or a lunch, and the invitation, seeking leaders for just such a time as this. I figured if somebody recognizes that quote, that's the person I want to have. So I thought if I get 10 people to show up, I'm good. 80 pastors came, 80. And when I asked them, have you ever been to a pro-Israel event before? They said, no. So I said, well, why are you here today? And one pastor said to me, because you asked. That changed my life. And I realized if you want to start, you just have to ask. Let's do something together. Let's have one event together. Let's have one exchange. Let's understand each other. Let's have a Holocaust memorial remembrance event. Let's honor a righteous Gentile together. Ask. And it's amazing the response that you'll get. So I think that would be my first suggestion.
Well, and I think that takes me right to my next question about the importance of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day and how that is being used to combat anti-Semitism.
So I'm going to, Carly, I'll let you take it after this, but one of the things it serves, Elie Wiesel was my mentor, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, and for many years I studied with him, and he would come to Chicago. And he always said that the people who try to deny the Holocaust are committing a double murder. He put it more beautifully than I do, but first they killed the victim, and then they want to kill the memory of the victim. So if we don't want to be accomplices in that, we need to remember. But we need to remember not only for the victim's sake, but for ours. Because Michael Oren said in the film, the war that starts against the Jews never ends with the Jews. And because the world let Auschwitz happen, it gave permission for Rwanda and for other genocides and for the attempted genocides against the Yazidis. Because we are silent when there is a genocide, and because we don't remember it, or we don't, that gives permission to more genocidal efforts. And if you walk into Yad Vashem, there's a quote from Hitler right in the entrance. And they said, well, when his advisors were saying, how are you going to get away with what your plans are for the Jewish people? He said, who remembers the Armenians? The world let that genocide go and gave permission for the next one. So I think it's not a Jewish problem. It's a problem for everybody when you don't remember the past.
Yeah.
And don't honor it and don't teach children, don't teach our young people, you are doing a grave misservice to them. And you're not giving them the warning signals that they need to do well in life.
Yes. Carl,
Yeah,
you want
I think
to?
the only thing I would add to that, because there's really not much that needs to be added to that, is just there are so many instances of people who have made these kinds of comments about the Holocaust, and the importance of remembering. And the one that always comes back to me was when Eisenhower visited one of the concentration camps, and he insisted that photographs be taken, that it be documented in detail. And when he was questioned about that, why is it necessary? Why aren't we just cleaning up and moving on? And he said, because someday someone will claim that this didn't happen. And we lived in that day. We're within living memory of it happening. And yet we have, plenty of people around the world who either denied that it happened at all or claimed that it was exaggerated. And so again, these are the things that make it just all the more crucial that we do remember. And part of that's just a part of the educational process.
Yes. Well, of course, the walking through the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem is so powerful, so moving. The first time we went on our first trip, we weren't able to take that tour. We went through the children's memorial, and I'm still getting chills right now just thinking about standing there and hearing those names. Every one of the names over, I'm trying to remember how many. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands. These were humans, and anytime you can dehumanize somebody, then supposedly that gives you the ability to treat them or do whatever, but we are designed and created in God's image, and so we need to respect each other as being created. So what about the impact does anti-Semitic stereotypes in media and entertainment, how does that play on our culture?
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead, Peggy.
I just wanted to comment when you said that we are created in God's image. The whole effort of the Holocaust was to undo God's creation. It was to take the light, and turn it into night. It was to undermine language, undermine humanity, to take everything that God had created and make it opposite. So if you're a person of belief, you could see that it's taking, instead of God created light, and that's why Elie Wiesel's first book was called Night, because that's what this created, a living night.
For sure. And
where I think Carly will know much more about this, but the front line now of anti-Semitism, especially with, the pandemic and lockdowns, is on social media.
Sure.
And we see the same images that could have been in Der Stürmer newspaper of Jews as not human, Israelis as not human, they're kind of vermin. It's some of the identical stereotypes that were there before, but there are a few new ones added for popular consumption today. For example, it's still difficult to deal with the Holocaust. So you'll see new imagery of, instead of the Jews being the victims, the Jews being the perpetrators. That the Holocaust is being committed by Jews, not against Jews.
Right.
But a lot of even the technique of the designs and the imagery, they use the same styles. It's kind of eerie. And we see that on social media. And my concern is, I think it was just yesterday that the CEO of Twitter said that denying the Holocaust is not classified as a misinformation on Twitter.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But and Peggy's exactly right that, that the two, I think, primary front lines, if you will, are the media and social media on the one hand, and then the campuses. And in terms of just the impact that anti-Semitic stereotypes being furthered and used in the media and on social media, the impact is, again, it's normalization. It's sending the message that this is normal, this is okay, this is acceptable, and then we've seen that the next step, the downstream from that, the next impact is physical violence. New York has had a wave of that for over the last year and a half, for sure. It's just continued to I guess, just to further that engine, and it's being fueled by what we're seeing on social media, online. People we hear the term radicalization when we talk about people learning things and being indoctrinated online, and that's essentially what's happening here. Is that anti-Semites are being radicalized, but it's not just like this fringe group. There are a number of celebrities that we've seen over the last several months who have tweeted or posted these anti-Semitic slurs and tropes that, as Peggy said, they're age-old notions and concepts that are just discriminatory. And again, I know we kind of keep going back to this, but it was, again, part of the, I think, crux of the film is that so much of this is based on misinformation or a lack of information. And that's where education comes in. And so we have the opportunity, and we do a lot of trying to educate when this happens, trying to be very clear publicly about why is this a problem? Why is this anti-Semitic? Why is this discriminatory? Why is it not all just in good fun? And the other thing that I have to say is that we also hear this said, frequently, is that the Holocaust didn't start with gas chambers. It started with words. And we are, living in a time where, words matter. They've always mattered, but they have meanings, and those meanings get distorted. And we talk about, and when I say we, I mean people talk about Israel in certain terms that are inaccurate. Again, denying the Holocaust or the extent of it, or these are words that are inaccurate, and when they get published on social media, they take on a life of their own. And so that's where this huge impact comes from, is just the fact that misinformation is spreading, to millions of people by the second. And it's a difficult thing to keep up with, but that's part of what we do. That's part of what you do, and in trying to counter this.
Yes.
But I just want, when you have an outrageous statement, but you say it again and again, and it gets passed down and repeated and retweeted, and you have even members of Congress supporting it and people not standing up against it, pretty soon it's common knowledge. And it becomes the way the general population thinks. So when somebody comes out with something anti-Semitic, it has to be addressed seriously. Okay. And when it's a person who's in the public eye, or certainly someone we've elected to office, then we have to take it really as seriously as life or death, because the distance between the words, hateful words and hateful action, is just a matter of opportunity. And we want to make sure that we react when it's still words and don't afford them the opportunity.
Yes, Peggy. And I think another key thing too, as you mentioned about Congress, is to stand up. I've heard it said that many of our representatives don't hear from their constituents. We just let things go. But if something is really standing out, like we're talking about tonight, of anti-Semitism, then we need to address that. We need to write letters to our congresspeople, because when they start hearing from their constituents, that's when they start acting. And so we need to take that. You kind of smiled there, Peggy, when I said that.
Why? Because the one thing every person in government can do is count. They count the number of calls they get on an issue.
Yes.
They count the number of emails. They count the number of letters. And wow, they really count when people are able to go in person. That is tabulated on what side of the issue. And it's an important part of their decision making. So every call and every email you make to your representative or senator or governor is counted and does count. Is extremely important.
That's
and
great.
I would just add that that we're talking about contacting elected officials, but I think it's important to point out about what, asking them to do what, informing them of what, right? What's the practical ask here? And I, again, going back to what we've been talking about earlier, I think one of the most important asks right now is well, two things: is to inform them, first of all, of what's happening in the community, especially if you have, say, a college campus that's been riddled with anti-Semitic incidents, or if your community itself has experienced some of this, vandalism of synagogues and things like that we're seeing. One, they should hear from you about this and what you think about this, and that you want action. And again, I think one of the first action items should be the request that they take up the IHRA definition and get that ball rolling. And so again, just to kind of bring it back down to the practical, I think that's crucial that we.
And Kelly, that information is available on the Stand With Us website. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. And we have booklets about this. I mean, all the things that we're talking about, Stand With Us is known for its educational resources. And there, so we have booklets about these things. We have, some of them are shorter, some of them are longer, just depending on how invested you want to get in the issues. But yes, absolutely. So you can go to standwithus.com/resources, and all of those educational booklets are there. And we encourage people not only to read those for yourself, but once you have read that and internalized that, if there are people that you think would benefit from that, whether it's, again, within your church community, within the political community, share those resources.
Well, we've had some wonderful audience tonight. It's been out here with us here at First Assembly, watching our conversation, and online too, as this is documented for future airing. But I got one last question as we start to wrap up our town hall tonight. Where is the front line of the fight against anti-Semitism in 2020 and as we move into 2021?
Yeah, and I think it's what we said earlier. For me anyway, I think it's a dual situation. I think we're talking about campuses, college campuses in particular, and social media. And honestly, the two overlap in many ways. And it's one of the things that we've seen growing during the COVID-19 pandemic, because people aren't getting together in person. So many of the events that might normally happen in person on campus that include anti-Semitic speakers or anti-Israel, rhetoric and the like, they're now happening online, on Zoom and other platforms that everyone has gone to. Well, it's problematic in general, just because the information that's being the misinformation that's being disseminated. But if you have an event that is in person on campus, you might be talking about a few hundred people. When you do this as a live event online, the reach is far greater than that. And so, I think that those are the two areas. As we said earlier, by the time students get to campus, and in particular, I'm talking now about Jewish students, by the time they get to campus, it's crucial that they know what they can expect. And it's not a foregone conclusion, that this is necessarily going to be your experience, but I don't think that we can afford anymore, to assume that, well, you can just keep your head down and you'll be fine. You won't have to deal with this. It's just not the reality. And so again, I think preparation is so key for students as they are preparing to head to college campuses, that they understand, exactly what it is that's happening, understanding. And again, I'm just kind of throwing out a number of things here, but, understanding what the BDS movement really is, understanding what intersectionality really is, and then understanding, how, as Peggy talked about, this coalition building. How do you counter some of that, and how do you develop relationships with other groups, so that you're not alone when you're dealing with this. And again, all of those skills and things that they can be learning about are translatable not only to in-person, on-campus activity, but also to online and social media activity.
And a coalition building, because once students realize that what unites us is far greater than what divides us, is where we'll be able to stand up against this assault of anti-Semitism.
Peggy, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Carly, I'm sure those that are watching want to know how to get in touch with Stand With Us and get these resources. Could you give the website?
Yes. Yeah. I'll give it one more time. It's www.standwithus.org. And then, like I said, you get on there, and there are so many resources available, but there is specifically a resources link. You can get directly to the booklets that we've been talking about that provide just more in-depth information and education about all of these issues. So absolutely encourage people to check those out. And like I said, to share those with as many people as you think really can be helpful and influential in doing what we're talking about here, which is using your voice and using your influence.
Ladies, God bless you. Thank you so much for being with us on this Never Again Town Hall tonight. A special thanks again to my good friend John Lindbergh for organizing this. And I hope you've all enjoyed watching this special feature. Let me encourage you, too, to get more information about Memphis Friends of Israel at memphisfriendsofisrael.org. John has a great show he does on the Bot Radio Network here in Memphis. So many of those shows are archived on that website. And so you can go to memphisfriendsofisrael.org and listen to some of his interviews. And Carly, by the way, has been a frequent guest on the program too, so you can hear past episodes of that. Well, on behalf of John Lindbergh, the movie Never Again, please tell a friend. Keep this issue in your prayers, and tell a friend. This movie is supposed to be showing around theaters around the country. Go to the website neveragainmovie.com and discover that. Maybe you have a family member in another city that's not aware of this movie. Be sure and let them know about that. Get the word out. There's plenty of social media material you can use to promote this movie. So I would encourage everybody tonight in our audience who has watched this movie, Never Again, please go to that website, Never Again Movie, and look for the social media posters and banners. Download those, share them, encourage people to watch this movie. I'm Byron Tyler from the Bot Radio Network. It's been my pleasure to be with you tonight for this town hall. Have a great night. Bye-bye.